An engineer too.
Sure. Welcome everybody. As Jack said, I am a member of the Knights of Columbus that's hosting this meal for you today. I wanted to get started by telling you first, I am in fact a bit of an engineer. I own 3 companies. One invents carbon ion therapy machines, which is an advancement on proton beam therapy for cancer. One has to do with inventing a new way of vaccinating people using some epitope refocusing, and one has to do with environmental remediation. So I'm very proud to say that science can live very peacefully with a deep and passionate faith, and I've always found science to be something that's complementary to rather than a compromise of faith. And that's kind of an important message that you should take back with you. At the Knights of Columbus, we really support 4 virtues: charity, unity, fraternity, and patriotism. But what we really do is what we do here, and we talk about how we do our things under 4 main categories. We support church activities, we support community stuff, we support family stuff, and most importantly, we support life. With respect to life, we do a lot, I think. We're the guys that are out there praying in front of Hillcrest. We contribute to the ultrasound campaign. In fact, this very council here of only 200 people bought the 20th ultrasound that was contributed to the state of Maryland through the Knights of Columbus just within the last year and a half or so. And we're marching all the time. Our connection, your connection, is a guy by the name of Joe Hayden, who's one of my good brothers in the Knights of Columbus, and I know he's active with your group, along with his wife Maria. What I really like about the Knights of Columbus, though, is that we can talk about all the things that we do. We donate, we volunteer, we do this and that in support of various things, but we really do 2 key things. And this is the importance of the Knights of Columbus. We stand with people, and we stand for something. When we stand with people, what we're trying to do is we're trying to take people that have a need, and we're trying to share that burden with them. You'll see us witnessing at caskets. You'll see us supporting people who have died. We support families of members that have died. We do a lot of that kind of stuff. But what I'm really interested in today is standing for something. We like to say, or I like to say at least, that there are 2 senior problems, SR problems in the world. It's secularism and it's relativism. We as Catholics don't believe that there is not absolute truth. We believe that there's a truth, and we stand by it. We stand for it. We'll stand up there and we will unabashedly say, I believe in God, I believe there's truth, I believe that our religion is based on that truth. It's important because the forces of the world today are really secular and are really relativistic. And you have to be really bold to stand for something in this world. And that's why we are so doggone delighted at the service that you guys perform. You're young people, you're out there. I can't think of a better way to get out there and show people that you're standing for something than what you do. I mean, Jack Ames over here is a hero of the Knights of Columbus. He really is. And I got to tell you, I often, when we give awards, we give a lot of awards to people that do good things in this world. And I'm just mystified at how much more that people can give than we give as Knights of Columbus. And that's part of our job. Our job is to recognize people and to reward them when they've done good things. And I got to tell you, to me and to my brother Knights, what you're doing this week is about the highest and most dignified thing you can do for the benefit of the world, the benefit of the unborn. There's just nothing better. And with that, I thank you all for doing it. I encourage you to remain committed to this task for the remainder of your lives. Anything you can do to draw people into this fight is a wonderful, wonderful thing. And if you ever need anything from the Knights of Columbus, just let us know. We're there to support you. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jack Ames. Thank you.
I'm going to call my talk today Recollections of My 47 Years in the Right to Life Movement. it's been about 47 years since I got started way back in 1972. Now, why was I pro-life? Well, I think it was because I was raised a serious Catholic. Great Catholic parents, great priest in my parish, Our Lady of Snows in Clark Summit, Pennsylvania. Uh, Wonderful teachers in my public high school, which was much more Catholic than most of our Catholic high schools are today. Bible reading, the beginning of every day, the Lord's Prayer. Catholics would stop, before the Thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory. And of course, the Pledge of Allegiance. And not only great academics, but great discipline. And then I went on to Villanova. We have several Villanovans here today besides myself. Good to see you, Father Wild. You've been such a staunch supporter of Defend Life all these years. And Albert Steckline as well. Turns out that Father Wild and I were at Villanova at the same time. He was an intern studying to become an Augustinian priest. And they called all of us undergrads externs because we were just there for 4 years. They were there for their life, basically. Father, God bless you for all the great work you've done for the pro-life movement all these many years. And God bless you, Albert, for all you've done, getting those signs out for our Face the Truth tours these many years. But one thing that comes to mind in particular, though, I was pro-life from the beginning. How did I find out? Interesting story. I didn't know what abortion was. I don't think I really understood what abortion was until I was in college. Because abortion was not something that people talked about. Not only what is not illegal, it was completely illegal, but it was unspeakable. So, between my second and third year at Villanova, there was this wonderful book written by Father McFadden. You remember him, Father Wild? Father John McFadden?
Charles.
Charles McFadden, who wrote The Philosophy of Communism, but he also taught things like medical ethics and so other important subjects. And I got a hold of his book, I think it was his book anyway, and there was a chapter in that book on abortion. And here I was sitting at a lunch break working at a Jewish country club, reading about what abortion was, and I was horrified. Wow, and I'm still horrified. But that would have been about 1963 or thereabouts. So I think that was the moment in my life that I really became a pro-life activist at heart. And then various states began watering down their abortion laws, including states like Maryland, California, North Carolina, and so forth. Even the great Ronald Reagan who signed a bill opening the door to abortion in California, said he regretted it before the ink dried because he knew in his heart he had done something that was wrong. And then when he became president, he did everything possible to reverse abortion. Another milestone was on January 22nd, 1973. I was at a meeting at the William Byrd Hotel in Richmond. It was a meeting promoting vocations to the Catholic priesthood. And somebody came in and said that Lyndon Johnson had just died. He was retired from the presidency at that point, LBJ as we called him. And guess what else happened that same day? It did not make the news like LBJ's death.
Roe versus Wade.
The same exact day, exactly, January 22nd, 1973. So I think that's when I just knew that I had to spend much of the rest of my life fighting abortion. I was an engineer worker at the train company, had a wonderful job, and I still love being an engineer. I'm very good at what I do. I wish I could do more engineering. But my first love is fighting the evil of abortion. One of the things that happened a few weeks after that, I got my weekly edition of The Wanderer, this great Catholic newspaper out of St. Paul, Minnesota, that goes back to about the 1830s. Was started as a German Catholic publication, and they had a black border around the front page, symbolizing how horrible this Roe versus Wade decision was that legalized abortion on demand for any reason, basically any time during pregnancy. And then a year later, I thought, heard about the March for Life. There was going to be that first March for Life, January 22nd, 1974. I thought, we need to get a group from Richmond to go up there. So we got 13 people together. We went up on a bus, and boy, were we fired up. That first March for Life, by the way, was around the Capitol. We just marched around the Capitol. And it was so moving to see these people, most of them from places like Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, New York, New England. They predominated at those first marches for life. And we went back to Richmond, and we started Richmond Right to Life. And one of the things we did is we went out to the local abortion mills. There was only one, and guess who had founded that? A Presbyterian minister, of all persons. He was the moving force behind that abortion mill. I had some confrontations with him. Another recollection I had, Bishop John Russell, who was from Baltimore, grew up in, what's the name of that parish? Who can tell me? The one with the anchor in front of it on Greenmount Avenue? St. Anne's. There's so much history in Baltimore, as you were saying earlier, Robert. And one of those historic places is St. Anne's Parish. Asked me that question during the question and answer period. Why is there an anchor, a ship's anchor in front of St. Anne's Parish? But anyway, that's the parish where Bishop John Russell had grown up. And some other wonderful priests and prelates had grown up in that parish too. I think you probably grew up pretty close to there too, Jim Altoff, right? Next parish over, St. Philip's and James.
Yes.
And anyway, Bishop Russell had now retired. He thought everything was great about Vatican II until suddenly he retired and he could see, no, not everything was so great. Maybe it was great, but the way it had been implemented was certainly not great. And God bless him, God rest his soul, he would come out to the abortion mill there on the boulevard right next to the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts and pray with us. How many bishops do that even to this day? And he had just come back from the bishops' meeting in Chicago, the semi-annual meeting, and the bishops had just voted in communion in hand, and he was horrified. And how prophetic that was. We see all the evils that have slipped into the church with this dumbing down of the way we receive the body and blood of Jesus Christ our Lord. Receiving standing, receiving in hand, no altar rails, things like that. Anyway, he was a great advocate for life, Bishop John Russell, who had grown up here in Baltimore. The first time I ever gave, can you hear me okay?
And this is going to fall over, the top part of your thing. It's leaning over.
This.
You
Yeah.
see it?
Oh,
Can you all hear me okay, by the way?
Yeah, the podium.
The
The
podium.
podium. The top of the podium.
Oh, they have the podium. We don't need the podium. The first time I ever gave a pro-life talk was in a non-Catholic church. There was this wonderful minister, his name was Bernard Overstreet, and somehow I had met him, and he invited me to come and give a talk. So I memorized what the great Jack Wilkie, Dr. Jack Wilkie, had said in his handbook on abortion. He had this nice little talk that you could give. I memorized it, and I gave that, and that was my first talk at this little church on a Friday night. Then we decided we had to go out to the Virginia State Fair. Virginia State Fair is about 20 times the size of the State Fair in Maryland. It's really a state fair. Like many of the Midwestern states have huge state fairs. And it's absolutely huge. Well, anyway, we rented a small booth under the name Richmond Right to Life, and we showed the victim images of aborted babies. And guess what happened? All hell broke loose. Lots of complaints. So the next year when we tried to rent that booth, they said, no, you can't do it. So we came up with an alternative. What we did is we showed the fetal development slides first, outside so everybody could see them, and then we said, and now, for those who would like to see what abortion really is, come inside our booth. And we were able to do it. It worked great. We also had some beautiful balloons that we filled with helium, and they said, what did they say on them? Give life a chance, and it showed the baby in utero. We were selling them for 10 cents each, and 3 for a quarter. What can you get for a quarter, right? But 3 helium-filled balloons. And some of the balloon vendors at other places in the state fair were not very happy because we were underselling. They were probably selling their balloons for $1. A couple of other recollections I had. There was actually a March for Life back in 1976. Actually, it was 1976. What was the year Jimmy Carter was elected?
Elected in 76.
Right. So where did the Democrats have their convention?
New York City.
Right. Where?
Madison Square Garden.
Right. So anyway, Nellie Gray, God bless her, the founder of the March for Life, God rest her soul, decided that we were going to have a special March for Life up in New York City. So most of the people who went came from places like Northern Virginia. We bussed up there. And the night before, remember who the Jimmy Carter was claiming to be a born-again Christian. And so anyway, I came up with this idea for I don't know if it was an original idea or not, but we could have a huge banner that said, Jimmy Carter, to be born again, one must first be born. And so it was about a 40-foot long banner. It was about 4 feet high, and I was able to get some heavy paper. And I got out in the church parking lot, and I made it with spray paint. Anyway, when Nellie Gray saw that, she was elated. She said, "You go to the head of the march." And believe it or not, that got into the New York Times, the politically correct New York Times. A couple of other things I remember is meeting Joe Scheidler for the first time back in about 1975. I had started calling Joe Scheidler's hotline because every day of the week, at least 5 days a week, he'd have a new 3-minute message. And it was so captivating, so inspiring. I knew I had to meet this man. So when I was traveling on business to a train company that was headquartered in La Crosse, Wisconsin. Wisconsin's a beautiful state. You should all go there. Ask me about La Crosse later, and I'll tell you something spectacular about La Crosse. Anyway, I was coming back from La Crosse, and I called Joe Scheidler, and I said, "Love to meet you." "Oh, sure, stop by." So we spent the day together, and we've been great friends ever since. And he's been one of my great inspirations, lo, these many years. What a great man. He's now 92 years old. He'll be our speaker, by the way, in November. So some of you who hear this wonderful video, I hope it's going to be wonderful anyway, sign up to have Joe Scheidler come and speak to your parish or Knights of Columbus Council in mid-November. In 1987, I moved to Baltimore. Now, Baltimore, Maryland is the birthplace of Catholicism in America, is it not? It's where the first Catholics came. What county did they come to, by the way?
St. Mary.
St. Mary's, right? And what was the name of the island where they had the first Mass? St. Clement's Island. Well, anyway, I thought this is going to be great because I'd be moving from Richmond that might have been 3 or 4% Catholic to Maryland that had to be at least 50% Catholic. Well, was I naive? It might have been 50% Catholic at one point, but most of the Catholics had headed for the hills. Most of the urban parishes, like the great one where Jim Altoff had grown up, were not great anymore because most of the Catholics headed out to the suburbs. So I never really found all that great Catholic and potentially pro-life activism that I'd hoped to find. But way back in 1985, we decided to start Defend Life. It started as the Cathedral of Mary Our Queen pro-life group, and then we decided we could do better. We moved it over to Loyola College, Jim's alma mater, and we thought we would get bigger crowds, and sure enough we did. Joe Scheidler was one of our first speakers. Mildred Jefferson. Anybody know who Mildred Jefferson was? God rest her soul. Yes.
She was a famous black American pro-life activist.
Right, and she was the first female graduate of Harvard Medical School, right, Father? Anyway, she was our very first speaker. We had some other wonderful speakers in those early years, too. We met at Loyola College, Jim's alma mater. We had some great people there, like Dr. Carol Susan Aphromitis, who has more tenure at any Jesuit college in America than any other professor. Oh, what a rock at Gibraltar Sue Aphromitis has been all these years, and so supportive of all of our efforts. Anyway, that's when we got Defend Life started, and we've been going ever since. We're going 32 years. And I just want to mention a few of the stories that I think are particularly memorable. There was an abortionist by the name of Earl McLeod. You remember him well, right, Albert? So we decided, Earl McLeod, who had about 4 abortion mills, it was time that we put some serious pressure on Earl McLeod. He had come up from the islands as a young man, went to college there in Washington. What's the name of the predominantly black school? Howard University. Went to Howard University Medical School and got in on the ground floor of abortion and was doing abortions galore. We think he had done something like 200,000 abortion procedures. So one of the things we did is we found out one of his botched abortions, this woman who had died. We did a Google search and found out that her high school, which I think was Walter Johnson High School. Walter Johnson was a great pitcher for the Washington Senators. And anyway, lo and behold, her high school was having its 5th high school reunion. And lo and behold, we figured, hey, there might be a picture of this woman in the yearbook. So I sent my good friend Missy Smith back by Walter Johnson High School, and sure enough, she was able to Xerox a picture of this young woman who had died at the hands of this abortionist, Earl McLeod. And we blew that up into a large poster and went out into his neighborhood. And we weren't able to retire him, but I think 2 of his 4 abortion mills did close as a result. His wife was not particularly happy either. And the point is, going into the neighborhoods where abortionists live is a very, very powerful tool. It's completely legal, it's certainly moral, because very, very often their neighbors have no clue that they're living in the same neighborhood as a killer. And they are. So we have to expose these abortionists. And it's their worst fear. Another example of this was Romeo Ferrer. Romeo Ferrer was a Filipino. He's still very much alive. And I think McLeod is still very much alive. I think he's still doing abortions. But Romeo Ferrer had studied to be a priest in the Philippines, then figured out he could have a much more lucrative career in medicine. So he changed over to medical school in the Philippines, became a doctor, came over and did his residencies and internships here in the Baltimore area, and got in on the ground floor of abortion as well. Well, at one point, we found out about at least one of his botched abortions where the woman had died. I think we got her picture. We couldn't find out where McLeod lived because he had an unlisted address. But somebody said, why don't you do a property search? And we did a property search, and sure enough, we found out he lived in West Annapolis. So we made a nice big postcard with his picture on it. I'll tell you how he got his picture in a minute. And the picture of this woman who died at his hands. And we circulated it in the neighborhood. That was the beginning of the end of his abortion career. Now, how did we get his picture? Because it was nowhere on the internet. There was going to be a hearing at the Maryland Board of Physicians because of some of the naughty things he had done. And we knew it was a certain time, a certain date. And we just stood there and waited for him. Figured he's not going to show. It was about 10 o'clock, about 2 minutes to 10. This car pulls up. A man gets out on the passenger side, and he's obviously a Filipino. So I say, Dr. Ferrer. He turns around. Click. And we got it. I was ready with it. And he waves his hand in disgust. Great picture. So that's the picture we used on the postcard. The point I'm getting at is this is the sort of thing we need to do, every one of us, because abortionists get away with it. Because nobody wants to do. You're doing something completely legal. It's not going to change your life, but it will change. It's going to save lives. So we need to do those things. Well, the long and short of it was that McLeod, he lost his license. He didn't even contest that. Then he tried to get some other doctor to come in to take over his abortion practice. And this doctor had an OBGYN practice. So some pro-lifers in Anne Arundel County went out and picketed his OBGYN practice. He came out and surrendered. Anything, I'll do anything. Just go away. And they said, well, you can't go to work and take over McLeod's practice. Not McLeod, but Ferrer's practice. So Ferrera's history, but we need to pray for the immortal soul of these men. I met with some wonderful Filipinos. They were Knights of Columbus. And I said, you have to go talk to this man. None of them would. They called up Ferrera. And he said, oh, my adult son is very sick. He was probably lying through his teeth. But we have to be courageous, fearless, and do these things. Because someday soon we're all going to be standing in front of the judgment seat of Almighty God, right? We're going to have to give a rendering, not only for everything we did, but for everything we did not do, right? Sins of commission, but sins of omission, which I think in many ways are so much more important. Anyway, there was another abortionist, I can't even remember his name, but he was a Lebanese abortionist practicing abortion here in America out at Franklin Square Hospital, out on the outskirts of Baltimore. And anyway, Joe Charter, who had spoken for us probably 24 times, was in town. We'd just gone to visit Joan Andrews, who was incarcerated up outside of Wilmington. Joan Andrews is easily one of the most saintly persons in the entire pro-life movement. Has done it all. Oh, read about Joan Andrews. If you don't, you're missing out on something wonderful. Then we went way out to Hagerstown, and Joe gave a talk at a non-Catholic church. And then he said, oh, I was telling him about this abortionist. And he said, well, let's give him a call. So we called him up, and Joe said, we're coming over to pick at your house tomorrow morning. And he said, no, I want to negotiate, you know. I forget what he, but anyway, he wanted to dialogue about it. So anyway, we didn't go over there, but a few weeks later, we made up this big flyer, and it had his name on it, his address, and his phone number. And we circulated it throughout the neighborhood. It said, did you know your neighbor, Dr. Whatever, is an abortionist? Please call him and do something more noble for a livelihood. And we passed it out in the neighborhood, but every house but his. He got a lot of phone calls. Because he called up, he said, oh, I saw your flyer. Subsequently, I tried to take a good Redemptorist priest to visit him. First time he stood us up, called up and said, oh, I had a very difficult delivery. It was twins and so forth. So we set it up again. He stood us up a second time. But then that time we really came down on him. And thanks be to God, he stopped doing abortions. Apparently he still referred for abortions, but he stopped doing them. But that's the sort of thing we must do if we want to end abortion. Because if we don't have abortionists, what? Most abortions are going to go away. Here's an example of that. There was a great person way down in, what's the name of that big city? It's a Catholic name on the coast. It's not San Antonio, it's,
St. Augustine?
In Florida?
no, in Texas.
Oh, Texas.
Corpus Christi.
Corpus Christi, thank you, Father.
I've been there.
Anyway, there was this wonderful woman and her husband, and they were both, she was from France. She had gone to medical school in France, and she married an American, and they came over and raised their children, one of whom I think is still working for Priest for Life. I'm sure you know who that is. A great daughter who is leading the pro-life fight at Princeton. Anyway, she decides that she's going to run an ad in the Corpus Christi Tribune. She never had to run the ad, but it was going to expose all the abortionists in Corpus Christi. So she simply writes a letter to each one telling about the ad that is going to expose them as an abortionist. You know what happened? Immediately 5 of them surrendered because they didn't want to be exposed. They said, we'll never do another abortion. One of them wanted to join a Catholic medical practice. The Catholic said, well, you can join, but you can't do abortions. One of them moved away. One of them, his own wife, believe it or not, did not know her husband was doing abortions. When she found out, that was the end of him. Another one, his best friend was a Catholic deacon. When the Catholic deacon found out, he said, we can't be friends anymore. But she got rid of 9 out of the 10 of abortionists. Completely legally, completely morally. That's the sort of clever thing outside of the box we have to do if we're going to end abortion. And as Father Frank Pavone has said so many times, Until Americans see abortion, Americans will not reject abortion. That's why we're here today, showing people, the people of America, the people of Maryland, what abortion is. Because of the fake news out there, the fake news because of academia, most of them still don't know. So we have to show them, and we know great things happen. So one of the greatest things that happened was 11 years ago. The date was August 1st, 2008. That would have been our 8th annual Maryland Face the Truth tour. And the last stop of that particular tour was in Bel Air. We always made our last stop in Bel Air on Friday afternoon. On this particular occasion, we were right by I-95 and Route 24. That's been completely rebuilt since then. And here comes the Maryland State Police trooper and said, who's in charge here? I said, she's over there. Beth Walsh is her name. So he stops the traffic, and we walk across together. And I said, officer, how long have you been on the force? He said, it's trooper, not officer. He said to hit a big chip on his shoulder. So we knew we were in trouble. So he goes up to Beth Walsh and said, where's your permit? She said, officer, we don't need a permit. You need a permit. Show me your permit. And I went, no, we really don't need one. Well, then you get out of here right away. I said, trooper, could you call up your senior trooper? We'll get a second opinion on this. Well, no, he's already left for the day. So what we did, and it was the right thing to do, is we went up 4 miles from this rather remote part of Harford County into the town of Bel Air. Bel Air is the county seat of Harford County. We knew we were in Bel Air because the sign said, welcome to Bel Air. So we went just beyond that sign on Route 24 and set up our signs again. And guess what happened? Here come the Maryland State Police. The welcome to Bel Air sign did not slow them down a bit. We thought we had any police jurisdiction to deal with it would have been the Bel Air Police, not the Maryland State Police. Anyway, they began arresting us. And Joni Walsh, who had just graduated from high school, her job was to start videotaping if the police ever showed up. So she's there videotaping. She's videotaping her sister, Beth, who went to Mount St. Mary's, now married with 3 or 4 children. And poor Beth is being arrested, handcuffed. And then guess who was next? Myself. You know, I'm feeling sorry for poor Beth, but I was next. And then everybody else was next. Albert, you were there that day. You were arrested. So what happens next? They cart all the young ladies, and I think there was 9 females. They cart them off in police cruisers to the state police barracks. But we're sitting there against the guardrail, the men, and waiting for a paddy wagon. We're wondering why are we waiting so long? Well, it's because the sheriff of Harford County smelled a rat. He knew something illegal had happened. They had requested a paddy wagon from Harford County. You see, the state police do not have their own paddy wagons. You all know what paddy wagons are, right? You know what a paddy wagon is? It's how they haul off prisoners. It's not very nice.
They
Anyway.
look like dog catchers' trucks. Very hot inside.
Anyway,
Tin cans.
the great sheriff of Harford County, a good godly man, smelled a rat, knew something illegal was going on, and called back his paddy wagons. So they had to call paddy wagons all the way from Baltimore County, and that's why it took so long. But they get us over to the state police barrack there in Bel Air, and they can't figure out how to charge us. So here's what happened. This female trooper, her name was Donna Boland. She was the trooper of the day. She was in charge of the nerve center, and that's a rotating duty. And she obviously had a huge chip on her shoulder because from all the data we were able to get, the radio transmissions and so forth, she was saying things like, after all, I am the BITCH. Wow, what did that mean? Or I told them to get the H out of Harford County. What did that mean? It probably meant she was post-abortive, and we're pretty sure she was. But the good news, here's what happened. It went to federal court, the depositions. The federal judge said, I hereby declare Defend Life the winner. If this case goes to trial, the only thing that will be up for grabs is how much money Defend Life gets and the other people who had been arrested, like Albert and myself. So at that point, the state of Maryland condescended, and even Martin O'Malley, our former pro-abortion governor, signed this agreement, and about $500,000 changed hands. Most of it went to our lawyers, our very good lawyers, but there were three young girls who were bra searched. They basically went to college free. But the best thing of all was the great publicity we got out of it. We couldn't have bought that publicity. We made the Sun paper, who have never seen an abortion they didn't like. We made the top of the centerfold in the Sunday edition. And that's when Sunday newspapers were pretty big. So great things have happened in Defend Life, and hopefully will continue to happen. And it's just so great to be here today with all you members of our Face the Truth core team, and with people like you, Father Dennis Wild, and with people like you, Father Albert Steckline. He's the father, too. That's what I mean when I say Father Albert Steckline. And all of you people from Pennsylvania, Robert, Mark, come so far, Joan, God bless you, Julie, all the way from Stephen City, Virginia. That's it. Does anybody have any questions?
Why is the anchor at St. Anne's Church? You told me that.
I'm so glad you asked that question. There was this Irish sea captain. This had to be back in the late 1800s, I would guess. And anyway, his ship was near capsizing, and it would have sunk. You know, it was a tall sail ship. That was before we had steamships. And he realized if his ship went down, his entire crew would go down. So he prayed to the Blessed Mother to spare his ship. And sure enough, the Blessed Mother came through, right? So he decided, he said, he made a deal with the Blessed Mother. He said, if you save my ship, I will build a church in honor of your mother, St. Anne. And that's exactly what he did. And that was his ship's anchor.
Ah, that's very shit.
Where's it located for us?
On Greenmount Avenue, probably about 5 or 6 blocks north of North Avenue, south of 33rd Street. Not too far from the old Memorial Stadium. I'll have to go there sometime. Anybody else have any questions?
Why do they call them paddy wagons?
I think it has something to do with Ireland.
Yes, it does.
Does anybody else have any questions? Yes, Julie.
I have two quick questions. How many times was Joan Andrews arrested?
Countless times.
Okay.
I'm sure she lost count many, many years ago.
And then what happened with lacrosse?
What happened in lacrosse?
Lacrosse, Wisconsin. You said
Oh,
that's
yeah.
another question.
Well, what famous prelate, what maligned but famous prelate is from La Crosse, Wisconsin? He's a cardinal. Burke. Cardinal Raymond Burke. So when I went to work for the train company, you remember I'll mention how I met Joe Charter on one of my trips from train back to Chicago, back to Richmond. I figured out that young Raymond Burke was at the seminary there in La Crosse, wonderful seminary. At the same time I was there in La Crosse. Well, anyway, La Crosse, very Catholic city. I'm sure beautiful Catholic churches, beautiful Catholic cathedral. It's a diocese. And when I heard him speak a few years ago, by the way, he does not get a cent from the Vatican. So he goes around the country, I think he lives in Kansas City, and Catholic groups should be inviting this great Catholic prelate to come and speak at their parishes. Wonderful, godly priest. And I said, he had built this, primarily responsible, this beautiful shrine to Our Lady of Guadalupe on what they call the bluffs. Now, you have the Mississippi River to the west boundary of La Crosse. By the way, the Mississippi River was originally named the River of the Immaculate Conception. So much of America is Catholic, but we don't know it. And there's about 3 miles of flat land coming east from the Mississippi River. Then all of a sudden there were these very tall mountains, probably 1,000 feet high. They called them the Bluffs. And it was probably about a mile from where I lived when I was there for 7 months. And I thought to myself, they will never build anything on those bluffs. They're just too steep. But I was wrong. That's where Colonel Burke had this wonderful shrine to Our Lady of Guadalupe built. So I asked him this question. I said, where did you get the inspiration to build a shrine? And he said, when I was growing up on a dairy farm in Richlands, Wisconsin, and if you live on a dairy farm, what do you have to do every day?
Milk the cows.
Milk the cows, exactly. He said, but occasionally his parents would get somebody else to milk the cows and take all their children on a pilgrimage to different pilgrimage sites in the upper Midwest. And that's where he got the idea to build this wonderful shrine. Anyway, thank you for being here. It's wonderful to having a chance to tell my story. God bless you.